Morning, Bobby. Good to see you.
Good
I
morning,
appreciate
Bernard. Good to see you.
And for those of you watching this live or watching us later on, we sure appreciate you giving us a few minutes of time. Of course, I'm Bernard Nomberg. This is Nomberg Law Live. I'm got my friend, Montgomery attorney Bobby Segall, with me. He's been so gracious to give me a few minutes of his time this morning. And Bobby, how's everything in Montgomery today?
So far, it's early in the morning, but it's pretty well so far.
Uh, there's so many topics that we could talk about. You've had such a illustrious career that I've observed from afar. I know you're a Montgomeryan. You grew up in Montgomery largely during the civil rights era. And for a Jewish guy living in Montgomery, I bet that was a unique experience. And tell us a little bit about some of your memories, if you will.
Well, you're right. I did grow up during the time of the bus boycott and during the time where really it was a George Wallace era, Frank Johnson versus George Wallace. Judge Johnson, in my view, growing up, was just a great hero. In the 50s, he ended up on the cover of Time magazine, largely, maybe it was the early 60s, but largely because of, his civil rights rulings, but also his conflicts with George Wallace. It was a time of great upheaval, though.
Well, Bobby, I know that you ultimately went to Vanderbilt, then Alabama Law School, and made your way eventually to Harvard. What took you up to Harvard?
My wife claims it was to find a wife, which I did when I got there. I actually, like the first day I was there, you go to Harvard Housing, you don't have any place to live, so you have to find the place. So I went to Harvard Housing and had like a number of locations, and people, there's a great demand for housing, so they interviewed you. And Cambridge was like a slum area. I mean, it was just the worst places in the world. And then I came to this incredible house, and my future wife answered the door and interviewed me. They had one slot left, and I was thinking to myself, whatever it takes, I'll marry this woman to get into this house, and I did pass the interview, and that's how I met my wife.
Well, it sounds like things worked out for you. On your how long were you in Cambridge?
A little over a year.
And you were studying, was it a tax degree you were going for?
No, it was a general LLM. I sort of concentrated in constitutional law.
I see. And then after you graduated from Harvard, then take us next on your journey. Where did you land after that?
Well, before I went there, I actually got my dream job of clerking for a year for Judge Johnson, Frank M. Johnson Jr., which was, I did that and then went to Harvard. Clerking for him was just amazing to me. I couldn't believe that I got the job, and I almost didn't get the job because I didn't know how to type. The main issue he asked me in the interview, he said, literally one of his first questions was, "Can you type?" And I sort of paused, and before I answered, he said, "Because my present law clerk cannot type, and he's dominating my secretary, so I'm never hiring another law clerk that can't type." And I said, "Judge, if you offer me a job, I promise you I'll be able to type by the time I get there." And I immediately enrolled into a typing class, which with the advent of email and all that, I'm really glad about. I did take typing so I could type. But anyway, it was a great year. It was a great year with Judge Johnson.
I wanted to expand on that for just a little bit. For those folks who don't know who Judge Frank Johnson was, I'd like you to share a little bit of your thoughts of him and what his role was during that era in Montgomery and really around the world, frankly.
Yeah. Bernard, it's amazing the folks who really don't know who he is. There's going to be a centennial celebration of what would be his 100th birthday, both in the Middle District of Alabama, a federal court system, and at the University of Alabama. But he was a guy who grew up in Winston County. He was a Republican, fought in World War II, and then he was appointed to the bench by Eisenhower. He was not welcome in Montgomery when he came because he didn't come from within the district, and there was a favorite son in Montgomery who everybody thought should get it. But he was a guy who just believed in following the law. He came on the bench right after Brown versus Board of Education, which desegregated schools, which said you can't have separate but equal. You have to integrate schools. And nobody in the South just about wanted to do that. Judge Johnson did desegregate the schools in Alabama, and then he applied Brown versus Board of Education beyond that. The bus boycott, there was an issue about whether or not buses could be segregated. He ruled that they could not be. It's a 3-judge court. And, excoriated, then he gets in, and anything you can imagine. He desegregated YMCA, parks, everything you can imagine, and then had great rulings on prisons, mental health, and other areas. Just a great judge who George Wallace probably used in his campaigns a good bit. It's a good story about that. I won't take up all your time about it, but you could talk about him. He was certainly my hero growing up and still to this day.
In that year that you got to spend with him, I'm sure you were witnessed and participated maybe as a writer or contributing researcher for some of his best opinions during that time period. Are there any notable cases that you want to share with us or that stand out from memory?
Yes, as you know, Judge Johnson has passed on, so I don't know that he would say that I wrote any of his best decisions, but it was an exciting time. He is the first person who ruled about a right to treatment for people involuntarily committed to mental institutions. And he said, if you're going to involuntarily commit somebody, you need to treat them. And just tremendous experts from around the country. I guess people still know the Menninger Clinic in Kansas. Carl Menninger came down and testified in the enforcement proceedings. So there was great stuff in mental health, voting rights. He was really good. Morris Dees and Chuck Morgan, who was from Birmingham, but at that time was the legal director of the ACLU in D.C., tried a great reapportionment case. I mentioned voting. You've probably heard, or maybe most people may have heard, that George Wallace called Judge Johnson. He's the guy who George Wallace called a carpet-bagging, scalawagging liar. Well, that grew out of a voting situation where Judge Johnson had ordered Wallace to produce certain records. I think Wallace at the time may have been a circuit court judge, and Wallace, made all these public announcements how he was never going to comply. The government brought contempt proceedings against him. But Wallace, under the cover of darkness, produced the records. He adhered to the order, but he didn't want anybody to know it. Well, Judge Johnson found him not in contempt because he had complied. And that's what he called Johnson a liar about, and made a lot of headway. I think the carpetbagging I never could figure out. I think that's because he came from Winston County to Montgomery. It's the only thing I could think of.
I know that those two butted heads for many years, and I wish I would have been a fly on the wall or sitting on your shoulder, at least during that 1 year where you were clerking for Judge Johnson. So I know you have many, many great memories of that time period. But after your year with Judge Johnson, I know you told us you went up to Harvard, but then you came back to Montgomery. What was next for you when you got back after Harvard?
Yeah, let me tell you one more thing about Judge Johnson.
Absolutely.
I don't think most people know it. He was appointed FBI director. He had gone from district court to sitting on the Fifth Circuit, which is now the 11th Circuit. And Jimmy Carter appointed him FBI director, but he got ill. He had a heart issue. And right before his confirmation hearing, he had to drop out. But the other thing is he came that close to be appointed to the United States Supreme Court while I was there. We were, Judge Johnson and his brother and some other man he knew and two law clerks were fishing. And he got a call from the Chief Justice, Berger. Nixon was the president of it at that time. And he told we got a radio message on the boat. And he went to shore, and it was the Chief Justice who said he was the person who was being considered. He was not in competition with anyone. It was him, yes or no. And Nixon's people were checking on local contacts in Alabama. Well, I knew that was going to be the end of it because the local contacts in Alabama who Nixon would check with would not be favorable. So he did not get it, but he came, I guess he came close until it came to the local check. Are you still there, Bernard? I've lost you.
I am. I don't know what's happened. Just hang on just a second, Bobby. Let me see if we're still there. With technology, you never know what happens sometimes.
Right. You're back.
I'm here, Bobby. I don't know what happened to my computer, but still going. Okay. The beauty of technology. I apologize for the interruption, Bobby.
No,
The last thing that I heard from you is y'all were on the boat. You got a radio call. They were checking local contacts about Judge Johnson for the Supreme Court position.
right. And given Judge Johnson's rulings in Alabama and in the South, the local contacts could not be expected to be favorable, and they were not. They said that the most prominent person reported back to Judge Johnson said it'd be the most unpopular appointment in the state of Alabama you could possibly make. So that ended it. But it was it was a great effort. He came very close.
Certainly.
When he was, I know you don't want to hear all about Judge Johnson. I'll tell you one last thing.
Sure.
his brother, Jimmy Johnson, was a real character. And Judge Johnson said that when he was appointed FBI director, he had a favorite fishing boat. He just loved it. And he sold it to Jimmy for a very fair price, his brother, because he wanted somebody to take care of it. He knew his brother would. So after he couldn't be FBI director because of this heart issue and surgery, he told Jimmy he wanted to buy the boat back. And Jimmy gave him a price that was double the price. Judge Johnson said, Jimmy, that's ridiculous. You've raised the price. He says, well, you know that this boat used to be owned by a very famous judge. It's worth something now.
Only between brothers. For those of you just joining us, thank you for tuning in either live or watching us on rebroadcast. I'm with Montgomery attorney Bobby Segall. Bobby has a fantastic stories that he's telling us about famed Judge Frank Johnson. We're now, and if you have questions or comments that you want to ask Bobby or me about this, please throw them into the comments section, whether we see them live or later on, we'll make sure we get those to Bobby. Bobby, after coming back from Harvard, you went into private practice. Tell us what have you been concentrating on the last several years? Tell us, I know you've had many cases of notoriety, but I'd like to hear some of your legal career, if you would.
Okay, well, when I came back, I went to work with what then was known as Hobbs Copeland. Mm-hmm. And it's now Copeland Franco, but it's the same firm, and I've been with the same firm the entire time. I have had a lot of pretty interesting cases. One that comes to mind, not that it was that big a case, but I have fond memories of it just because it sort of strikes me as funny. This was, I can't remember the year, it's been many years ago, but, the Southern Poverty Law Center created this Civil Rights Memorial, and people come really all over the world to see it now. It has a list of the martyrs, and, it has water coming down. Maya Lin created it. So the Southern Poverty Law Center had a dedication of the Civil Rights Memorial, and the Ku Klux Klan was demonstrating. And Morris Dees, who I think most people know he and Joe Levin started the Southern Poverty Law Center. He didn't want the Ku Klux Klan to march. He's concerned about violence and that kind of thing. There were First Amendment issues involved because folks have the right to express themselves in that way. But I got hired by the Southern Poverty Law Center to represent it against the Klan in that case. And before court that morning, it was before Judge Robert Varner in the Middle District Federal Court. Morris and I met with then Montgomery Mayor Emory Farmer, who was a staunch Republican, very conservative. You wouldn't think he and Morris had much in common, but we were collaborating because the city was on Morris's side on this issue. While we're meeting, the police chief comes in and he says there has been a legitimate threat on Morris's life. That we've picked that up. We're very concerned about it. And, we need to take precautions. So the mayor says, well, y'all, Chief, you and some other police officers, y'all take Morris and Bobby over to the courthouse and y'all stay there and man the entrances and all that. So we go get into the chief's car. City Hall is just around the corner from the federal courthouse. So he says, the chief says, okay, we're here. Y'all get out. Meaning go into the courthouse. And I'm saying, what is this y'all business? I didn't hear anybody say they're gunning for the lawyer. I said, Dees, you get out. I could see the headline the next day, schmuck lawyer takes bullet for Dees, intended for Dees. So but I was joking around. Dees and I did run out, and it all turned out very well. But that was one sort of interesting case, and there have obviously been many, litigation against Roy Moore related to the Ten Commandments. Uh, I had what I considered to be really the honor of representing, being one of the lawyers representing Milton McGregor, who died recently in 2 criminal trials. And he was, I mean, a lot of people don't like gambling, and that's certainly a reasonable feeling. But he was a great, nice guy. And those were 2 good experiences, and handled prison cases, most recently one involving prisoners with HIV and some mental health cases, and basically plaintiffs' cases and defense cases, just general litigation practice. And I love being a lawyer. I love lawyers, and I think lawyers are the most entertaining, best people to be around. And it's never been boring. I still love it.
Well, there's a fire and a passion that I know has been with you for all these many years. But before going to law school, what was it about, what influences during your childhood or during your teenage years that kind of lit that fire in your mind that this is what I want to do as my profession? I want to help folks. What was it about your youth?
I don't know that there was any great moment like most everyone or a lot of people. We've all had role models, and I had a cousin who was a good bit older than me, actually, who lived in Nashville, played basketball, like you played football for Vanderbilt. He played basketball for Vanderbilt, and he became a lawyer, and a great lawyer in Nashville. And, I just spent time talking to him. And so from the time I was a kid, I always wanted to be a lawyer. And then, you read about great things that lawyers do, and that combination just sort of made me become a lawyer. When I joined Copeland Franco, I worked for just tremendous lawyers. Judge Truman Hobbs Sr. was our senior partner then. He and Albert Copeland, whose son Lee Copeland is in our firm now. I think a lot of folks know Lee. Albert Copeland was one of the best trial lawyers that I've seen in person. I mean, he was just a phenomenal trial lawyer. Unfortunately, got cancer and died, like at 56 years of age. But, one thing that I think of when I think of Truman died not, a couple of years ago, maybe. And not only was my senior law partner, but then I had the good fortune of trying some cases with him and then stayed friends. And his sons, Dexter and Truman Jr., were in our law firm. Truman Jr. is now a judge, Circuit Court of Montgomery County. And Dexter got cancer and died like at 34 years of age. But Truman clerked for Justice Hugo Black on the United States Supreme Court. And this is one of my good memories of Truman. Drayton Neighbors, who was the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, also was a law clerk for Hugo Black at different times. Truman was a good bit older than Drayton. Drayton Neighbors also taught me legal writing in law school. So there was a program by end of court in Montgomery County's chapter about Hugo Black, and 2 people on the panel were Truman and Drayton Neighbors. They were going to talk about him, and I had the privilege of introducing them. And, in my introduction, I said, it's just great to have you guys. You know so much about Hugo Black. You've actually had the experience, and that's what the audience, I'm sure, is interested in. But for me personally, it's even greater to have the two of you because it really completes a circle in my political, I mean, in my legal life.
Uh-huh.
And I said, Chief Justice Neighbors, you taught me legal writing. And I said, when I turned in my first memo to Judge Hobbs, lawyer Hobbs at that time, he said, who the hell taught you legal writing? And I said, Judge Hobbs, I give you Chief Justice Neighbors. That's who taught me legal writing.
I'm sure they both got a big kick out of that.
Fortunately, I improved some after the first memo.
For those of you just joining us live or will be watching this later on, I'm talking, it's a great, very fun interview with Montgomery attorney Bobby Segall. He's telling us some awesome stories and memories. And as we get close to finishing the interview, Bobby, I wanted to ask you, there are certain tenements of the practice of law that will never change. But as society has moved forward, as the world has gotten smaller and smaller with the advent of technology and phones, certain things have changed. I'd like your thoughts on a few. What would you, by way of advising young lawyers who are just starting out in their legal careers, what are some things that they really, regardless of the modernization of technology, et cetera, what are some things that have never changed that they really should follow as they're starting out in their young careers?
Well, there's one thing that I think everybody would agree on that should stay sort of the same as, and it has changed a good bit, but and it varies from county to county in Alabama. But I recently had a civil case trial in Macon County with a Tuscaloosa lawyer was on the other side, and there were Montgomery lawyers on my side, and there was a lawyer from Elmore County and Tuscaloosa County on the other side. And at the end of the trial, this only been about the last 3 weeks ago, the lawyer from Tuscaloosa said that he'd never been in a case where adversaries, in a pretty bitter lawsuit, I mean, the parties weren't happy with each other, where the lawyers were so civil and got along so well, at breaks and in addressing the court and that kind of thing. And, traditionally, I mean, I really hate to hear old guys like me talk about the way it used to be and how it's changed. But, back when you knew, I mean, the bar's grown in number. And back when you knew everybody was nice to each other because you socialized with them, you saw them, you were friends. And then the bigger the bar gets and the fewer people, you take slights more personally, or some people do. And it's easy to get mad and you lose a little civility. But that's the most important thing is we are all in this together. We all have clients to represent. Hopefully we're going to be in other cases together. May win some, may lose some, may get upset about it, but ultimately there's no reason, generally there's no reason to get mad, and it'll make life a lot easier if you don't. And a lot of that depends upon when a young lawyer comes along what the attitude is of the other lawyer who he or she is working with. So, there's one of the, it used to be you could send somebody a letter that was a little bit negative about the other lawyer's client. You write the letter, you put it in the mail, you forget about it for 3 or 4 days. Now, I think this is something that do with tempers flaring sometimes. Now you write a nasty letter, you hear back in 10 minutes, so the quarrel keeps going. But that's one thing that I would say. And then all the other things, being straight with the court, being on time, doing the things you're supposed to do, that's always going to be the case.
Bobby, I can't thank you enough for your time this morning. Such sage advice, great stories. I certainly appreciate your time and your sharing of your wisdom and your stories today. So thank you very much for spending some time on NOMBERG Law Live with me today, despite the glitches in the computer.
Thank you, Bernard. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Certainly, and that'll conclude us for today. Thank you all for spending some time with me, talking with Montgomery attorney Bobby Segall. If you have questions or concerns, comments, whatever it may be, put it in the comments section. I'll see them. We'll make sure we get them to Bobby. And of course, we'll be back with you again next Tuesday, as we are always at 10 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Pacific. And hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Take care.